The envelope, a story of betrayal and justice. The mahogany tables stretched between them like an ocean of polished wood, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse conference room. Victoria Sterling sat with her spine straight, her manicured fingers clasped in front of her, watching as Bradley, her soon-to-be ex-husband, whispered frantically to his attorney. 7 years. 7 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Mrs. Sterling, Bradley's lawyer, a thin man with nervous eyes, began. My client maintains that he had no knowledge of the prenuptial agreement you claim exists. Victoria's attorney, Margaret Chen, didn't even look up from her notes. That's interesting, considering he signed it. Under duress, Bradley interjected, his voice cracking slightly. I was pressured. I didn't understand what I was signing. Victoria finally spoke, her voice steady as granite. Bradley, you graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law. Are you really going to sit there and tell them you didn't understand a legal document? The color drained from Bradley's face. Chapter 1. The beginning of the end. 3 months earlier, Victoria had always been careful with money. Not paranoid, not obsessive, but careful. When you inherit a technology company worth $200 million at 25, when you spend the next 15 years growing it to $500 million, you learn that people see dollar signs before they see you. She thought Bradley was different. They'd met at a charity gala, one of those black tie affairs where wealthy people congratulate themselves for writing checks. Bradley had approached her not with a pickup line about her dress or her smile, but with a thoughtful question about her company's new renewable energy initiative. Most tech companies just greenwash, he'd said, swirling his champagne. But Sterling Industries is actually investing in infrastructure. That takes real vision. He was handsome in an understated way, tall with graying temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. A successful attorney with his own practice, specializing in environmental law. He drove a modest Tesla, lived in a nice but not ostentatious townhouse, and when he took her to dinner, he chose restaurants for their food, not their ability to impress. For 6 months, he never once mentioned her money. I think I'm falling in love with you, he'd told her one evening, as they walked through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. I think I already have, she'd replied. The proposal came a year later. Simple, private, perfect. Just the two of them on the roof of her penthouse, the city sprawling out below them like scattered stars. He'd gotten down on one knee with a ring he'd clearly chosen himself. Elegant, but not extravagant, a solitaire diamond that caught the light beautifully. Victoria Sterling, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you make me the happiest man alive? She'd said yes without hesitation. The wedding planning was a dream. Bradley was involved, but not controlling, offering opinions when asked, but never demanding. When her wedding planner suggested they could easily accommodate 500 guests at the plaza, Bradley had laughed. I'd rather have 50 people who actually matter to us than 500 who are just there for the champagne. They settled on 150 guests at a beautiful estate in the Hamptons. Intimate, elegant, perfect. It was Margaret Chen who brought up the prenup. Victoria, I know this isn't romantic, but it's fine, Victoria interrupted. Of course, we're doing a prenup. I'd be stupid not to. Margaret had looked relieved. I can draft something reasonable, protection for your premarital assets, some provisions for spousal support if the marriage lasts more than 5 years. Make it ironclad, but fair. I don't want to screw him over, but I need to protect what I've built. When she brought it up with Bradley, she'd braced herself for awkwardness, maybe even a fight. Instead, he'd nodded immediately. Of course, he said. That makes perfect sense. I'd want the same thing if I were in your position. Really? You're not offended? Bradley had taken her hands in his. Victoria, I'm not marrying you for your money. If I were, I'd be the kind of man who'd be offended by a prenup. The fact that you need to protect yourself is just reality. I respect that. The prenup meeting had been straightforward. Bradley had brought his own attorney. Victoria had insisted on that, wanting him to have independent counsel. They'd gone through every clause, every contingency. Bradley had asked thoughtful questions, suggested a few modifications that were actually in his favor, and signed without drama.
"This feels weird," he'd admitted afterward. "But I'm glad we did it. Now we can get married knowing we're both protected." The wedding was everything Victoria had dreamed of. Bradley's vows had made her cry. Not the pretty, single-tear cry of movies, but the ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs of someone hearing exactly what they needed to hear. "I promise to love the woman you are today, and the woman you're becoming," he said. "I promise to support your dreams even when I don't understand them. I promise to be your partner, not your dependent, and to build a life with you that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours." For 5 years, it had felt like ours. Chapter 2. The cracks begin to show. The first sign came disguised as caring. "You're working too hard," Bradley had said one evening, finding her in her home office at 11 p.m., still reviewing quarterly reports. "When's the last time you took a real vacation?" "I'm fine," she'd replied automatically, not looking up from her screen. "That's not what I asked." His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. "You've been in this office every night this week. We haven't had dinner together in 3 days." She'd finally looked at him, seeing the frustration in his expression. "I'm sorry, the renewable energy division is launching next month, and there's always something launching next month. There's always another crisis, another deadline, another reason why you can't step away. Bradley, this is my company, my responsibility. And what about your responsibility to us, to this marriage?" The fight that followed was their first real one. Victoria tried to explain the pressures she was under, the weight of employing 15,000 people, the responsibility she felt to her investors, her customers, the environment itself. Bradley had nodded and made understanding noises, but she could see it in his eyes. He didn't really get it. "Maybe you should delegate more," he'd suggested. "Hire more executives. You don't have to carry everything yourself. I already have an excellent executive team. Then use them." "Bradley, you're acting like the company will collapse if you're not personally involved in every decision." "Because it might." "No, it won't. You're not that important." The words had hung in the air between them like a slap. Bradley had immediately tried to walk them back, but the damage was done. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant you've built something so strong that it can survive without your constant attention. That's a good thing." But Victoria had heard what he really meant. "You're not as indispensable as you think you are." The second sign came 6 months later, wrapped in the language of concern. "I've been thinking about our financial setup. Don't you think it's a little unbalanced?" Victoria had looked up from her tablet where she was scanning the morning's financial news. "What do you mean?" "Well, everything is in your name. The house, the investments, even the checking account I use has your name on it." "That's because it's my money," she said slowly. "But we're married. Doesn't that make it our money?" "Bradley, we have a prenup. We discussed this extensively before we got married." "I know, but that was theoretical. Now we're actually living it, and it feels strange, like I'm just a guest in my own life." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Maybe we could set up some joint accounts, put the house in both our names. I'm not talking about changing the prenup, just making our day-to-day life more equal. The house is worth $12 million, Bradley. I know that. I'm not trying to steal from you. Victoria, I'm trying to feel like a husband instead of a dependent." They'd compromised. Victoria had added Bradley's name to our primary checking account and set up a generous monthly allowance. But the seed had been planted. The fourth sign came disguised as career advancement. "I've been offered a partnership," Bradley had announced one evening, his eyes bright with excitement. "That's wonderful." Victoria had genuinely been happy for him. "At your firm?" "No, at Morrison, Blake and Associates. They're one of the top environmental law firms in the city." Victoria had frowned. "But you love your practice. You've built something great." "I have, but this is a chance to go bigger. Morrison Blake handles cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They're offering me a 7-figure salary plus equity." "Since when do you care about 7-figure salaries?" Bradley's excitement had dimmed slightly. "Since I've realized what it's like to be married to someone who makes that in a month." "Bradley, I'm not criticizing you, Victoria, but it's hard, okay? It's hard being the spouse who contributes less. This partnership would change that." Victoria had supported the move, of course. She'd even used her connections to help Bradley network with Morrison Blake's other partners. But something had felt off about the whole thing. The fourth sign came as pillow talk. "Do you ever think about what would happen if something happened to you?" Bradley had asked one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "What do you mean?"
I mean, God forbid, but if you died, what would happen to Sterling Industries? Victoria had felt her body tense. There are succession plans in place. But what about me? Would I have any say in the company's direction? Bradley, you're an environmental lawyer, not a tech executive. I know, but I've been living with this company for 6 years now. I understand it better than you might think. Victoria had rolled over to face him. Where is this coming from? I just want to make sure I'm protected. We're protected. We have the prenup. You're protected. The prenup protects me if we get divorced. I'm talking about if we stay married, but something happens to you. Victoria had stared at him in the darkness, feeling something cold and unfamiliar settling in her chest. Are you asking me to change my will? I'm asking you to think about our future, our life together. She thought about it all right. She thought about it for weeks. Chapter 3. The investigation. Victoria had always trusted her instincts. They'd served her well in business, helping her spot opportunities and avoid pitfalls that had destroyed other companies. Now those same instincts were screaming at her. She hired the private investigator on a Tuesday morning, meeting him at a small cafe downtown where no one would recognize her. I need to know if my husband is having an affair, she'd told David Reeves, a former FBI agent who now ran a discreet investigation service for high net worth individuals. What makes you think he is? He's been different, asking strange questions about money, staying late at work more often, being secretive about his phone. David had nodded, making notes. These things often have innocent explanations, Mrs. Sterling. Are you sure you want to go down this road? I built a $500 million company by facing uncomfortable truths, Mr. Reeves. I'm not about to stop now. The first report had come back clean. No affairs, no suspicious behavior. Bradley was exactly where he said he was when he said he was there. But, David had said during their second meeting, there are some financial irregularities I think you should know about. Victoria's blood had run cold. What kind of irregularities? Your husband has been meeting regularly with the divorce attorney. The words had hit her like a physical blow. What? Jonathan Mills, one of the best divorce lawyers in the city, specializes in high-asset cases. They've met 6 times in the past 2 months. Victoria had felt the world tilt around her. Are you sure? I have photographs, Mrs. Sterling. Timestamps. Your husband has been planning this for a while. The second revelation had been worse. He's also been in contact with the forensic accountant, someone who specializes in finding hidden assets in divorce proceedings. But there are no hidden assets. Everything is documented. That's not what they're looking for, Mrs. Sterling. They're building a case that the prenup is invalid. David had slid a folder across the table. These are the documents they've been reviewing. They're arguing that you coerced your husband to sign the prenup, that he didn't have adequate representation, that the terms are unconscionable. Victoria had felt sick. He had his own lawyer. We bent over backward to make sure he was protected. I know, but they're building a narrative. The poor environmental lawyer manipulated by the ruthless tech heiress. The third revelation had broken her heart. Mrs. Sterling, I need to tell you something else. Your husband has been liquidating assets. What assets? He doesn't have any significant assets. The Tesla is gone. Sold 3 weeks ago. He cleaned out the joint checking account you set up, emptied his 401k and IRA, converted everything to cash. Victoria had stared at David in shock. Why would he do that? Because he's planning to disappear those assets before filing for divorce. He's going to claim he's broke, that he sacrificed his financial security for your marriage, and that the prenup left him with nothing. But that's fraud. It's strategy, Mrs. Sterling. If he can convince a judge that he's been financially abused in this marriage, that the prenup was signed under duress, he might be able to break it. Victoria had left that meeting feeling like she was walking through a nightmare. 7 years of marriage, and she hadn't known her husband at all. The fourth revelation came from her own accountant. Mrs. Sterling,
I've been reviewing the household expenses like you asked, Patricia Kumar had said during their emergency meeting. There are some charges I need to ask you about. What kind of charges? Large cash withdrawals, payments to shell companies, expensive purchases that don't match your lifestyle. Patricia had shown her the statements. Over the past 6 months, Bradley had been slowly but steadily siphoning money from their household accounts. 20,000 here, 30,000 there, always just under the limit that would trigger automatic alerts. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer, Patricia had said grimly. Victoria had felt something inside her crystallize. The hurt was still there, the betrayal still burned, but underneath it all was something harder and colder, determination. Patricia, I need you to do something for me. Chapter 4, The Gathering Storm. Victoria didn't confront Bradley immediately. Instead, she watched him, studied him like she would study a competitor's business model. She began to see things she'd missed, or chosen to ignore. The way he'd started working late on nights when she had important board meetings, forcing her to attend alone. The way he'd gradually stopped asking about her work, claiming he didn't want to bother her with business talk at home. The way he'd begun making small, cutting comments about her success, disguised as jokes or concern. Must be nice to have enough money that you don't have to worry about anything, he'd said just the week before, when she'd mentioned renovating their summer house. I worry about plenty. Right, but not real worries. Not paying the bills worries. Not what happens if I lose my job worries. At the time, she'd felt guilty. Now she recognized it as manipulation. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in November. Bradley had called to say he'd be late, another emergency at the firm. Victoria had decided to surprise him with takeout from his favorite restaurant. She'd driven to Morrison Blake's offices, intending to text him from the lobby. The security guard looked confused when she'd asked which floor Bradley was on. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have anyone by that name working here. Bradley Sterling. He's a partner, started about 8 months ago. No, ma'am. I've been here 3 years and there's no Bradley Sterling at Morrison Blake. Victoria had sat in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, trying to process what she'd learned. If Bradley wasn't working late at Morrison Blake, where was he spending his evenings? David Reeves had the answer by Monday morning. He's been meeting with his legal team, not just the divorce lawyer now. They've brought in a litigation specialist, someone who handles contested divorces for high-asset cases. How many people are working on this? At least 4 that I've identified. They're preparing for war, Mrs. Sterling. Victoria had felt a cold rage settle in her chest. Then they'll get one. She'd called Margaret Chen immediately. Margaret, I need you to review my prenup. Every word, every clause. I need to know if there are any weaknesses. Victoria, what's going on?
Bradley is planning to divorce me and contest the prenup. I need to be ready. Margaret had been quiet for a long moment. How do you know? I hired an investigator. Bradley's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Bring me everything you have. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. If he wants to fight, we'll give him a fight he'll never forget. The next 2 weeks had been a blur of preparation. Margaret had assembled her own team, a forensic accountant to trace Bradley's hidden assets, a private investigator to document his deception, a jury consultant to help them understand how his narrative might play in court. The good news, Margaret had told her, is that your prenup is airtight. It was properly executed, both parties had independent counsel, and the terms are reasonable. Any attempt to invalidate it will be an uphill battle. And the bad news? The bad news is that divorce cases aren't always decided on facts. They're decided on stories. And Bradley's story, the loyal husband manipulated by the rich wife, might resonate with some judges. Victoria had nodded grimly. Then we need to tell a better story. What story is that? The truth. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. Victoria chose her moment carefully. It was a Sunday morning in December, snow falling softly outside their bedroom windows. Bradley was reading the Times in bed, coffee steaming on his nightstand. It was peaceful, domestic, normal. It was perfect. Bradley, we need to talk. She sat on the edge of the bed. He looked up from his paper, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Fear? Guilt? But it was gone quickly, replaced by his usual calm expression.
What's on your mind? How long have you been planning to divorce me? The question hung in the air between them. Bradley's face went through a series of micro-expressions: shock, denial, calculation, before settling on injured innocence. What are you talking about? Victoria pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph. Bradley sitting across from Jonathan Mills at an expensive restaurant, documents spread between them. You've been meeting with divorce attorneys for 3 months, Bradley. You've liquidated your assets, you've been siphoning money from our accounts, and you've been building a case to invalidate our prenup. Bradley set down his newspaper carefully, his lawyer's training taking over. Victoria, I can explain. Please do. I've been feeling unsettled about our marriage, about the financial imbalance. I wanted to understand my options. Your options for what? For protecting myself if this marriage doesn't work out. If this marriage doesn't work out, Bradley, you've been sabotaging this marriage. You've been lying to me for months. I haven't been sabotaging anything. You don't even work at Morrison Blake. I went to your office, Bradley. There is no Bradley Sterling at Morrison Blake. There never was. Bradley's careful composure finally cracked. You've been spying on me? I've been trying to understand why my husband has been acting like a stranger. Maybe because you've never really seen me as anything more than a stranger. Bradley's voice rose, years of resentment finally spilling out. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to you, Victoria? Being the accessory to your success? That's not fair. Isn't it? When we go to parties, I'm Victoria Sterling's husband. When we travel, it's on your jet, to your houses, with your money. When we have dinner with other couples, they ask me what I do like it's a cute hobby, because everyone knows my career doesn't matter. Victoria stared at him. I never made you feel that way. You didn't have to. The world did, and you just let it happen. So your solution was to steal from me? I wasn't stealing. You emptied our joint accounts. You've been taking cash for months. You sold your car and didn't tell me. What would you call that? Bradley stood up, pacing to the window. I call it protecting myself from someone who sees me as a liability. I have never... Haven't you? Bradley turned to face her, his expression hard. When's the last time you asked my opinion about anything important? When's the last time you included me in a major decision? Victoria felt her anger wavering, uncertainty creeping in. Bradley, if you felt excluded, even if I failed as a wife, that doesn't justify fraud. It doesn't justify lying to me for months. I wasn't. You've been planning to divorce me while pretending everything was fine. You've been stealing money while telling me you loved me. You've been building a legal case against me while sharing my bed. Victoria's voice broke. How is that not betrayal? Bradley was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the falling snow. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. I didn't want it to be like this. Then why is it like this? Because I was afraid. Because I knew that if I asked for a divorce honestly, you'd crush me. Because I knew that your lawyers and your money and your power would leave me with nothing. Victoria wiped her eyes. The prenup protects you, Bradley. You would have been fine. Would I? The woman who built a $500 million company was just going to let her ex-husband walk away with dignity intact? Yes, Victoria said simply. Because that's who I am. Bradley laughed bitterly. That's who you think you are. But I've seen you destroy competitors, Victoria. I've seen you ruin people who crossed you. I wasn't going to take that chance. So instead, you decided to ruin me first. The words hung between them like a sword. Bradley's face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Victoria. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. I know. Victoria stood up, smoothing her robe. I want you out of the house by tonight. Victoria, please, can we... No. Her voice was steady now, businesslike. We can't. You made your choice, Bradley. You chose deception over communication. You chose theft over trust. You chose to see me as an enemy instead of a wife. I can change. Maybe you can, but not with me. Not anymore. Bradley started to say something else, then stopped. He nodded once, a sharp, defeated motion. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. You do that. But Bradley, the war you've been planning for? It starts now. Chapter 6. The Battle Lines. The divorce papers were filed 3 days before Christmas. Victoria spent the holiday alone in her penthouse, looking out at the city lights and wondering how her life had gone so wrong so quickly. Margaret called on December 26th. I've reviewed Bradley's filing, she said without preamble. It's even worse than we expected. How much worse? He's not just contesting the prenup, he's claiming that the entire marriage was a form of economic coercion. He says you used your wealth to isolate him from his friends and family, that you made him financially dependent on you, and then used that dependence to control him. That's not true. I know it's not true, but he has evidence to support his narrative. What kind of evidence? He's documented every time you paid for something significant. Every vacation, every dinner at an expensive restaurant, every time you used your connections to help his career. He's framing your generosity as a pattern of control. Victoria sank into her chair. He's making me sound like an abuser. That's exactly what he's doing. And there's more. He's claiming that you forced him to sign the prenup by threatening to call off the wedding. I never threatened anything. I believe you. But he has an email you sent during the prenup negotiations where you said you couldn't move forward with the wedding until the agreement was finalized. Victoria remembered that email. She'd been trying to be responsible, making sure all their legal issues were resolved before the ceremony. Now it was being used as evidence of coercion. Margaret, what are my chances? If this went to a jury, I'd be worried. Bradley's story is compelling, and juries don't like wealthy people very much. But we're not going to a jury. This is going before Judge Harrison, and she doesn't suffer fools. Victoria had heard of Judge Patricia Harrison. Tough, fair, known for cutting through legal theaters to get to the truth. She'll see through this? If we present our case properly, yes. But Victoria, I need you to understand something. Bradley's team is going to destroy you. They're going to paint you as a manipulative, controlling, emotionally abusive woman who used her wealth as a weapon. Let them try. They're going to bring up every business decision you've ever made, every competitor you've outmaneuvered, every employee you fired. They're going to argue that if you treat your business associates this way, of course you treated your husband this way. Victoria felt her jaw clench. Then we show them who I really am. How? With the truth, with evidence, with the facts they've been so carefully ignoring. Margaret was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I mean that while Bradley was planning his little war, I was gathering intelligence. I know about every meeting he had with his lawyers. I know about every asset he tried to hide. I know about every lie he told and every manipulation he attempted. Margaret, I know about the girlfriend. Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. What girlfriend? Her name is Sarah Chen. She's a paralegal at Mills's firm. They've been seeing each other for 6 months. How do you... Never mind, I don't want to know. Can you prove it? Photos, credit card receipts, hotel records. David Reeves is very thorough. This changes everything. I know.
If Bradley was having an affair while planning this divorce, it destroys his credibility completely. That's the idea. Margaret was quiet for another moment. Victoria, are you sure you want to go nuclear? Once we put this information out there, there's no taking it back. This will be ugly. Victoria thought about Bradley's face when he'd accused her of being controlling. She'd thought about the months of lies, the careful manipulation, the way he'd made her doubt herself and her own memories. Margaret, he declared war on me the day he decided to contest that prenup. I'm just going to finish what he started. Chapter 7. The Discovery. The discovery phase of the divorce was brutal. Bradley's team subpoenaed 5 years' worth of financial records, business communications, and personal correspondence. They deposed Victoria's assistant, her housekeeper, her driver.
anyone who might have witnessed what they characterized as her pattern of controlling behavior. Victoria's team fired back with equal force. They subpoenaed Bradley's phone records, his bank statements, his communications with his legal team. They deposed his colleagues, his friends, even his barber. What they found was a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception that had been in planning for over a year. "Look at this," Margaret said, spreading documents across her conference table. Bradley started meeting with divorce attorneys 18 months ago, long before he claimed the marriage started having problems. Victoria studied the timeline. He was planning this before he even started complaining about feeling marginalized. It gets worse. Look at his financial records from 2 years ago. He took out a loan against his life insurance policy and used the money to hire a forensic accountant to analyze your assets, while we were still happy, while I thought we were building a life together. And here, Margaret pointed to another document, are communications with a jury consultant. They've been testing different narratives for months, figuring out which version of events would be most sympathetic to a judge. Victoria felt her anger crystallizing into something colder and more focused. What else? The Sarah Chen situation is worse than we thought. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. Look at these texts. Margaret handed Victoria a folder of printed text messages. Her hands shook slightly as she read them. "Can't wait until this is all over and we can be together properly. Bradley. How much longer do you think the divorce will take? Sarah. My lawyer thinks we can drag it out for at least a year. The longer it takes, the more sympathetic I look. Bradley. I hate that you have to go through this. She sounds like a monster. Sarah. She is, but monsters have weaknesses, and I know all of hers. Bradley. Victoria set the papers down, her hands steady now. He was using me. The whole time, he was just using me. Victoria. No, Margaret, I need to say this. I loved him. I really truly loved him, and he saw that love as a weakness to exploit. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Victoria's hand. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not the victim here anymore. I'm the prosecutor. What do you mean? Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. I mean, Bradley wanted a war, he's about to get one. Chapter 8. The Counterattack. Victoria's countersuit was filed on a Friday afternoon in February. By Monday morning, it was front-page news in the business section of every major newspaper. Sterling Industries CEO alleges fraud in divorce case. Countersuit claims husband orchestrated elaborate deception to contest the prenup. The filing was devastating. Victoria's team had documented every lie, every hidden asset, every piece of evidence showing that Bradley had been planning his divorce strategy for over a year while pretending to be a loving husband. But the most damaging revelation was the affair. Mr. Sterling has alleged that he felt marginalized and controlled in his marriage. However, evidence shows that while making these claims, he was conducting an extramarital affair with a paralegal at his attorney's firm, suggesting that his alleged emotional distress was a performance designed to generate sympathy for his financial claims. Bradley's response came within hours. His lawyer held a press conference outside the courthouse, painting Victoria as a vindictive billionaire trying to destroy a man who simply outgrown her attempts to control him. Mrs. Sterling has unlimited resources and a team of lawyers dedicated to character assassination. This is exactly the kind of behavior that drove Mr. Sterling to seek protection through the courts. Victoria watched the press conference from her office, Margaret sitting beside her. He's good, Margaret admitted. He's turning your strength against you. The fact that you can't afford a team of lawyers becomes evidence that you're a bully. What's our next move? We stay focused on the facts. We don't get drawn into a media war. We let the evidence speak. But Victoria wasn't satisfied with just letting the evidence speak. She wanted the world to hear it clearly. Chapter 9. The Deposition. Bradley's deposition was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. Victoria insisted on being present, despite Margaret's advice that it might be emotionally difficult. I need to see him. I need to look him in the eye when he lies under oath. The conference room was sterile and cold, all glass and chrome and uncomfortable chairs. Bradley sat across from Margaret, his own lawyer beside him, looking thinner than Victoria remembered. The affair had apparently been stressful.
Margaret started with easy questions, establishing basic facts about the marriage, the prenup, the timeline of events. Bradley answered smoothly, confidently, sticking to his prepared narrative. Mr. Sterling, you've claimed that you felt financially controlled during your marriage. Can you give us some specific examples? Well, everything was in Victoria's name. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. I felt like a guest in my own life. But you agreed to that arrangement when you signed the prenup, didn't you? I was pressured into signing that prenup. Victoria made it clear that there wouldn't be a wedding without it. Victoria felt her jaw clench, but Margaret's expression remained neutral. Mr. Sterling, did you have independent legal representation when you signed the prenup? Technically, yes. What do you mean by technically? Bradley shifted in his chair. The lawyer was recommended by Victoria's team. I didn't feel like he was really working for me. Margaret pulled out a document. This is a bill from your attorney, Mr. Harrison, for 43 hours of work on your prenup. During those 43 hours, did he ever advise you not to sign? No, but did he suggest any changes to protect your interests? Some, yes. And were those changes incorporated into the final agreement? Bradley was quiet for a moment. Most of them. Mr. Sterling, you've also claimed that you felt isolated from friends and family during your marriage. Can you elaborate? Victoria didn't like my friends. She thought they weren't sophisticated enough. Victoria's eyes widened. She had never said anything of the kind. Did Mrs. Sterling ever explicitly forbid you from seeing your friends? Not explicitly, but she made her feelings known. How? She would make comments, suggest that I was wasting time, schedule things for us during times when I might otherwise see them. Margaret nodded, making notes. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to show you some documents. These are your credit card statements from the past 2 years. She slid a folder across the table. Bradley glanced at it nervously. Can you explain these charges to Emerald City Restaurant? $347 on January 15th, $298 on February 3rd, $412 on February 18th. I don't remember specific charges. These are all dinner charges for 2 people, Mr. Sterling, during a time when Mrs. Sterling was traveling for business. Can you explain who you were dining with? Bradley's lawyer leaned forward. Objection. Relevance. Mr. Sterling has claimed that he felt isolated and controlled. These charges suggest he was maintaining an active social life without his wife's knowledge. I had business dinners. With Sarah Chen. The question hung in the air like a bomb. Bradley's face went white. I don't... Miss Chen, the paralegal at your attorney's office, the woman you've been having an affair with for the past 6 months, For the first time since she'd known him, Bradley was speechless. Victoria watched him struggle, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Mr. Sterling, were you having an extramarital affair while claiming that your marriage was emotionally unfulfilling? Bradley's lawyer was objecting, but Bradley held up a hand to stop him. Yes, he said quietly, I was having an affair. Margaret nodded calmly. When did this affair begin? About 6 months ago. Before or after you began meeting with divorce attorneys? Bradley was quiet for a long moment. After. I see. So you began planning your divorce, then began an affair with someone at your attorney's office. It wasn't planned that way. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to show you some text messages between you and Miss Chen. Margaret slid another folder across the table. In particular, I'd like you to read this one, dated February 14th. Bradley picked up the paper, his hands visibly shaking. Can you read that message aloud, please? I don't think... Mr. Sterling, you're under oath. Bradley cleared his throat. It says, can't wait until this is all over and we can be together properly. And this one, from February 20th, another long pause. My lawyer thinks we can drag it out for at least a year. The longer it takes, the more sympathetic I look. Victoria felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. He had been planning to drag out her divorce, to make her suffer, to maximize his financial gain. Mr. Sterling,
Do these messages suggest that you viewed your divorce proceedings as a strategy rather than the end of a failed marriage? That's not how I meant. And this final message from March 2nd, can you read that one? Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. She is a monster, but monsters have weaknesses, and I know all of hers. The room was silent except for the court reporters typing. Victoria stared at Bradley, this man she had loved, who had just called her a monster under oath while explaining how he planned to exploit her weaknesses. Mr. Sterling, Margaret continued, her voice still calm. You've claimed that Mrs. Sterling was controlling and manipulative. Based on these messages, who do you think was actually being manipulative in this marriage? Bradley's lawyer was objecting, but the damage was done. Bradley sat slumped in his chair, looking smaller and older than Victoria had ever seen him. Margaret gathered her papers. I think that's enough for today. Chapter 10. The Revelation. After the deposition, Victoria sat in her car for 20 minutes, not trusting herself to drive. Everything she had believed about her marriage, about Bradley, about herself, had been stripped away and revealed as carefully constructed lies. He had called her a monster. The man who had whispered, "I love you" in her ear just months ago, who had promised to support her dreams, who had vowed to be her partner, he had called her a monster while planning to destroy her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Are you okay? Victoria typed back. Define okay. Wanna talk? Not yet. I need to process this. Victoria drove home slowly, through the city streets she knew so well. Everything looked the same, but she felt fundamentally changed. The naive woman who had trusted her husband's love was gone, replaced by someone harder and more clear-eyed. Back in her penthouse, Victoria poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city, her city, the place where she had built her empire, where she had created something that mattered. Bradley had seen all of that as a threat. Her success hadn't inspired him, it had diminished him. Her love hadn't fulfilled him, it had trapped him. Her generosity hadn't been appreciated, it had been resented. But that was his failure, not hers. Her phone rang. David Reeves. Mrs. Sterling, I have some additional information you need to know about. What now? It's about the timeline. The affair with Sarah Chen didn't start 6 months ago like Bradley claimed. Victoria felt her stomach drop. How long? At least 18 months. I have hotel records, credit card receipts. They were together before he even started meeting with divorce attorneys. The wine glass slipped from Victoria's hand, shattering on the marble floor. 18 months. He had been cheating on her for 18 months while telling her he loved her, while making plans for their future, while sharing her bed. Mrs. Sterling, are you there? I'm here, she managed. There's more. The job at Morrison Blake? It was never real. He made the whole thing up to explain his absences. He's been working as a consultant for a firm that specializes in high-asset divorces. What? He's been essentially interning with divorce lawyers for over a year, learning how to dismantle marriages like yours. This whole thing, the affair, the financial manipulation, the character assassination, it's all been planned from the beginning. Victoria sank into her chair, feeling like the world was tilting around her. You're telling me that my entire marriage was a lie? I'm telling you that your husband has been preparing to divorce you since before you even had problems. After David hung up, Victoria sat in her living room surrounded by broken glass, trying to make sense of what she'd learned. Had Bradley ever loved her? Had any of it been real? She thought about their wedding day, about the vows he made with tears in his eyes. Had he been planning this even then? Had he been calculating her net worth while promising to love her forever? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Margaret. Victoria, I just got a call from Bradley's attorney. They want to settle. What kind of settlement? $50 million and they'll drop the prenup challenge. Victoria laughed, a sound with no humor in it. $50 million? It's a substantial amount, but given what we learned today, no. Victoria, I think you should consider no. Margaret, I'm not giving him a penny more than the prenup stipulates. But the cost of litigation. I don't care about the cost. This isn't about money anymore. Then what is it about? Victoria looked out at her city, at the empire she had built with her own hands and her own vision. It's about justice. Chapter 11. The preparation. The weeks leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of preparation. Victoria's legal team worked around the clock, organizing evidence, preparing witnesses, crafting their strategy. The key, Margaret explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions, is to control the narrative. Bradley's team is going to paint you as a controlling, manipulative woman who used her wealth as a weapon. We need to show the judge who you really are. And who am I? Margaret smiled. You're a woman who built something extraordinary through hard work and vision. You're someone who was generous to a fault with a man who exploited that generosity. You're a victim of a sophisticated fraud, not a perpetrator of abuse. Victoria's team had assembled a devastating case. Financial experts who could trace every dollar Bradley had hidden, technology specialists who could authenticate every text message and email, character witnesses who could testify to Victoria's generosity and kindness. But their strongest weapon was Bradley himself. His deposition was a disaster for him. Calling you a monster, admitting to the affair, revealing his strategy to drag out the proceedings, it all undermines his claims of being the wronged party. What about Sarah Chen? We're deposing her next week. If she's smart, she'll distance herself from this whole mess. If she's not, well, conspiracy to commit fraud is a serious charge. Victoria had one more card to play, one that she hadn't told Margaret about yet. Margaret, I need you to subpoena someone else. Who? Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She was our marriage counselor. You went to marriage counseling? For 6 months. About 2 years ago. Bradley suggested it, said he wanted to strengthen our communication, and I think he was using it to gather ammunition against me. Dr. Martinez is bound by confidentiality, but if we subpoena her records, Margaret's eyes lit up. We might find evidence that he was building his case even then. He recorded some of our sessions on his phone, said he wanted to review them later to work on our issues. He recorded therapy sessions without your consent?
Without Dr. Martinez's consent either. It's probably illegal. Margaret was already reaching for her phone. We're subpoenaing those records tonight. Chapter 12. The counselor's records. Dr. Martinez's records painted a picture that made Victoria sick to her stomach. For 6 months, Bradley had systematically baited Victoria into arguments during their therapy sessions, then used her responses as evidence of her controlling nature. Look at this session from October 2022, Margaret said, reading from the transcripts. Bradley brings up the prenup, seemingly out of nowhere. He says he's been having second thoughts about the financial arrangements in your marriage. Victoria remembered that session. She had been blindsided by Bradley's sudden concerns, especially since they had never discussed them privately. And here's your response. Bradley, we agreed on these arrangements. We both signed the prenup after extensive discussions with our lawyers. Dr. Martinez notes that you seemed confused and hurt by the sudden change in topic. I was. We had never talked about renegotiating our financial arrangements. But look at how Bradley frames it in the next session. He tells Dr. Martinez that you shut down his concerns and refused to discuss them. He makes it sound like you were being unreasonable. Victoria studied the transcripts, seeing the pattern clearly now. Bradley had been creating problems in their marriage, then documenting her responses as evidence of dysfunction. And here, Margaret pointed to another entry. Bradley suggests recording your sessions to help with communication. Dr. Martinez advises against it, but you agree because you want to be supportive. I thought he was trying to improve our marriage. He was building a case file. The most damaging evidence came from Bradley's own notes, which he had apparently forgotten to delete from their shared iCloud account. Pages and pages of observations about Victoria's behavior, her responses to stress,
her weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Victoria gets defensive when her business decisions are questioned. Could use this to show pattern of controlling behavior. Victoria doesn't like unexpected changes to plans. Possible evidence of rigidity/control issues. Victoria works late when stressed, could frame as neglecting marriage. It was methodical, calculating, and completely heartless. Margaret, Victoria said quietly, I want him destroyed. Victoria, not financially. I don't care about the money, but I want everyone to know what he did. I want his reputation, his career, his future. I want it all to reflect the truth about who he really is. Margaret was quiet for a moment. That's not really how divorce court works. Then maybe we need to think beyond divorce court. What do you mean? Victoria's smile was sharp. I mean that if Bradley wants to play games with my reputation, he's about to learn what happens when someone with real power decides to play back. Chapter 13. The trial begins. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Victoria's divorce had become a media sensation. The billionaire tech CEO versus the husband claiming financial abuse. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, lawyers, and curious observers. Judge Patricia Harrison was exactly what Victoria had expected. A no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and little patience for theatrics. This court is here to determine the validity of a prenuptial agreement, not to litigate the morality of either party's behavior during their marriage. We will focus on facts, evidence, and the law. Bradley's attorney, Jonathan Mills, opened with a carefully crafted narrative of manipulation and control. Your Honor, my client entered into marriage with Mrs. Sterling believing he was joining a partnership. Instead, he found himself trapped in a gilded cage, financially dependent on a woman who used her wealth to isolate and control him. Mills painted a picture of Bradley as a successful lawyer who had sacrificed his career and independence for love, only to find himself treated as little more than an employee in his own marriage. The prenuptial agreement at the center of this case was not the result of fair negotiation between equals. It was an ultimatum delivered by a woman with unlimited resources to a man who had already committed his heart and his future to their relationship. Margaret's opening was more direct. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Sterling's claims are not just false, they are the result of a calculated multi-year campaign of deception designed to defraud Mrs. Sterling of her assets. Margaret laid out the timeline methodically. The secret meetings with divorce attorneys, the hidden affair, the manipulation of their marriage counseling sessions, the attempts to hide assets. Bradley didn't sign that prenup under duress, Your Honor. He signed it while already planning to contest it. This entire case is the culmination of an elaborate fraud. Bradley's testimony came first. He presented well, contrite, hurt, seemingly honest. He talked about feeling diminished by Victoria's success, isolated by her wealth, controlled by her power. He loved Victoria, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I thought she loved me too, but I gradually realized that what she loved was having someone who depended on her, someone she could control. Mills walked him through specific examples. Times when Victoria had made financial decisions without consulting him, social events where he had felt like an accessory, moments when her work had taken priority over their marriage. It was compelling, Victoria had to admit. If she hadn't known the truth, she might have felt sorry for him. But then Margaret began her cross-examination. Mr. Sterling, you testified that you felt financially controlled during your marriage, but you also admitted in your deposition that you had access to joint accounts with significant balances. Is that correct?
Yes, but... And you had credit cards with substantial limits? Yes. And Mrs. Sterling never questioned your expenses or restricted your spending. Bradley hesitated. Not directly. What do you mean by not directly? She would make comments, express disapproval. Margaret pulled out a document. Mr. Sterling, I'm showing you your credit card statements from the past 2 years. Can you point to any charges that were questioned or disputed by Mrs. Sterling? Bradley scanned the papers for several minutes. I don't see any. So when you say Mrs. Sterling controlled your spending, you mean she never actually controlled your spending? It was more subtle than that. Mr. Sterling, You testified that you felt isolated from friends and family, but these same credit card statements show regular charges to restaurants and bars, don't they? Yes, including multiple charges for 2 people at expensive restaurants while Mrs. Sterling was traveling for business. Bradley's face was reddening. Yes. Were you dining alone at those restaurants, Mr. Sterling? No. Who were you dining with? A long pause. Various people, including Sarah Chen, sometimes. How often is sometimes, Mr. Sterling? I don't remember exactly. Margaret pulled out another folder. Your Honor, I'm introducing these photographs into evidence. They show Mr. Sterling and Miss Chen at various restaurants and hotels over the past 18 months. The photographs were devastating. Bradley and Sarah holding hands across restaurant tables, kissing in hotel lobbies, looking very much like a couple in love. Mr. Sterling, these photographs span an 18-month period. Is it your testimony that this affair only lasted 6 months? Bradley looked trapped. I may have been mistaken about the timeline. Mistaken? Or lying under oath? Mills was objecting, but the damage was done. Margaret moved in for the kill. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that you began this affair before you ever claimed to have problems in your marriage? I don't remember. Isn't it true that you used your alleged marital problems as justification for an affair you had already begun? That's not. And isn't it true that you manipulated your marriage counseling sessions to create evidence for this divorce case? Bradley was sweating now, his composed facade cracking. I was trying to fix our marriage. By recording sessions without your wife's consent? By taking notes on her behavior to use against her? By creating problems where none existed? I was documenting. You were building a case file, weren't you, Mr. Sterling? The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Bradley looked like a man who had been caught in a trap of his own making. I want to read you something, Mr. Sterling. Margaret pulled out a document. This is from your own notes, found on your shared iCloud account. Quote, Victoria gets defensive when her business decisions are questioned. Could use this to show pattern of controlling behavior. End quote. Does that sound like someone trying to fix their marriage or someone trying to destroy it? Bradley's lawyer was objecting again, but Judge Harrison overruled him. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. I was documenting patterns. For what purpose? A long, damning silence. Mr. Sterling, for what purpose were you documenting your wife's behavior? For this divorce case? Yes. While you were still married? While you were telling your wife you loved her? While you were sharing her bed? Yes. Margaret turned to Judge Harrison. No further questions, Your Honor. Chapter 14. The Counter Evidence. Victoria's testimony came next. Margaret had prepared her well, and she spoke clearly and calmly about her marriage, her business, and her attempts to be a good wife to a man that had been systematically betraying her. I loved Bradley, she said simply. I thought he loved me too. I tried to include him in my life, in my decisions, in my world. If I failed at that, it wasn't for lack of trying. Mill's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint Victoria as cold, calculating, and controlling. But every attack seemed to bounce off her calm demeanor. Mrs. Sterling, isn't it true that you made all the major financial decisions in your marriage? I made the financial decisions about my company and my personal assets, yes. Bradley made decisions about his career and his personal expenses.
But the house you lived in, the cars you drove, the vacations you took, all of that was controlled by your money. It was paid for by my money, yes, but the decisions were made jointly. Really, can you give me an example of a major decision where you deferred to your husband's wishes? Victoria thought for a moment. When we were choosing where to get married, Bradley wanted a more intimate setting than I originally planned. We changed the venue and the guest list to accommodate his preferences.
what about financial decisions? Bradley didn't want financial decision-making responsibility. He told me many times that he preferred to focus on his legal career while I handled the business side of our life. Mills pulled out a document. Mrs. Sterling, I'm showing you an email you sent to your financial advisor. You write, please don't copy Bradley on these investment updates. He finds them boring and has asked not to be included. Doesn't that show that you excluded your husband from financial decisions? Victoria looked at the email calmly. That shows that I respected my husband's explicitly stated wishes not to be bothered with investment details he found tedious. But as your husband, didn't he have a right to know about these investments? Mr. Mills, these were my premarital assets. Bradley had no legal interest in them, and he specifically asked not to be involved in managing them. The cross-examination continued for hours, but Mills couldn't shake Victoria's composure or her story. Every example of controlling behavior had a reasonable explanation. Every instance of exclusion was actually Victoria respecting Bradley's stated preferences. But the most damaging evidence came from Victoria's team's investigation into Bradley's activities. Margaret called David Reeves to the stand and methodically walked through the evidence of Bradley's deception. The fake job at Morrison Blake, the hidden assets, the systematic planning of the divorce. In your investigation, Mr. Reeves, did you find any evidence that Mr. Sterling was genuinely attempting to repair his marriage? No. Every action he took during the past 2 years was consistent with someone planning to end his marriage and maximize his financial gain from doing so, including the marriage counseling? Especially the marriage counseling. Mr. Sterling's notes indicate that he viewed those sessions as opportunities to gather evidence, not to improve communication. Then Margaret called Dr. Martinez to the stand. The therapist was clearly uncomfortable testifying about her former patients, but her notes painted a damning picture of Bradley's manipulation. In my professional opinion, Dr. Martinez said reluctantly, Mr. Sterling appeared to be deliberately provoking conflict during our sessions, then documenting his wife's responses.
Is that typical behavior for someone genuinely seeking to improve their marriage? No. It's more consistent with someone seeking to build a case against their spouse. The final witness was Sarah Chen. Margaret had offered Sarah immunity in exchange for her truthful testimony, and the young paralegal had taken the deal rather than risk conspiracy charges. Sarah's testimony was devastating. She confirmed that the affair had lasted 18 months, that Bradley had discussed his divorce strategy with her in detail, and that he had explicitly told her he was manipulating the counseling sessions to gather evidence. He said Victoria was smart, but trusting, Sarah testified, her voice barely audible. He said she would never see it coming. Did Mr. Sterling ever express genuine remorse about ending his marriage? No. He talked about it like a business transaction. He was excited about how much money he thought he could get. Did he ever mention loving his wife? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. He said she was useful. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes. Useful how? Her connections, her money, her reputation. He said being married to Victoria Sterling opened doors for him. And when those doors were open, what was his plan? To take as much as he could and leave. Chapter 15. The Envelope. Judge Harrison called for closing arguments on a Friday afternoon. The courtroom was packed, the media attention intense. Victoria sat beside Margaret, her hands folded in her lap, watching Bradley across the room. He looked broken. The confident, charming man she had married was gone, replaced by someone hollow and desperate. Part of her felt sorry for him, but only a small part. Mills gave his closing argument first, making one last attempt to salvage Bradley's case. Your Honor, no one disputes that Mr. Sterling made mistakes. The affair was wrong. Some of his methods were questionable, but the fundamental issue remains. Was he coerced into signing a prenuptial that left him vulnerable and dependent? Mills argued that Bradley's deception was the result of desperation, not greed. That he had been driven to extreme measures by years of feeling powerless in his own marriage. Mrs. Sterling's wealth created an inherent imbalance that made true consent impossible. The prenup must be invalidated and the marital assets divided equitably.
Margaret's closing was more direct. Your Honor, this case is not about marital dynamics or financial imbalances. It's about fraud, pure and simple. Margaret walked through the evidence methodically. The timeline of deception, the hidden assets, the manipulated counseling sessions, and the affair that predated any alleged marital problems. Mr. Sterling didn't sign that prenup under duress. He signed it while already planning to contest it. This entire marriage was a long-term fraud designed to gain access to Mrs. Sterling's wealth. Margaret paused, looking directly at Judge Harrison. Your Honor, if we allow this kind of calculated deception to succeed, we're sending a message that marriage contracts can be invalidated through fraud and manipulation. We're telling people that lying, cheating, and stealing are acceptable strategies for financial gain. Judge Harrison listened to both arguments without expression, taking notes but revealing nothing about her thoughts. Court will recess until Monday morning for my decision, she announced. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Victoria felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Bradley standing behind her, his face pale and drawn.
Victoria, he said quietly, can we talk? Just for a minute. Margaret started to object, but Victoria held up a hand. It's fine. I'll meet you outside. Bradley waited until the courtroom was nearly empty before speaking. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Victoria. I never meant for it to go this far. Victoria studied his face, looking for some trace of the man she had loved. What did you mean for, Bradley? What was the plan? I don't know. I was angry. I was hurt. I felt diminished. Sarah made it seem like I deserved more, like you owed me more. So this was her idea? No. Yes, I don't know anymore. Bradley ran his hands through his hair. I'm not even sure what's true anymore. I've been lying for so long that I've forgotten what I actually felt versus what I convinced myself I felt. Victoria felt a strange kind of pity for him. Do you remember our wedding day, Bradley? Do you remember your vows? Of course I do. Did you mean them? Any of them? Bradley was quiet for a long moment. I thought I did. At the time, I thought I did. But you didn't. I don't know. I loved the idea of you, Victoria. I loved what being married to you could give me. But I don't think I ever really loved you. The honesty was brutal, but Victoria appreciated it. Finally, after all the lies, he was telling her the truth. Thank you for saying that, she said simply. Victoria, if I could take it all back. But you can't. And even if you could, would you? Really? If you could go back to our wedding day, knowing what you know now about yourself, would you still marry me? Bradley considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. I wouldn't, because I would know that I wasn't capable of being the husband you deserved. Victoria nodded. Then we agree on something. She started to leave, then turned back. Bradley, the next time you fall in love, if you ever really fall in love, try to be worthy of it. Chapter 16. The verdict. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Victoria dressed carefully in a navy suit that conveyed authority without arrogance. She felt strangely calm as she walked into the courthouse, flanked by Margaret and her legal team. The gallery was packed again, reporters and observers filling every seat. Victoria took her place at the defendant's table and waited. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9 a.m., her expression giving nothing away. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. I will now deliver my ruling. The courtroom was silent, except for the whisper of breathing and the scratch of pens on paper. The plaintiff, Mr. Bradley Sterling, has requested that this court invalidate a prenuptial agreement signed prior to his marriage to the defendant, Mrs. Victoria Sterling. He has alleged that the agreement was signed under duress and that its terms are unconscionable. Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at Bradley. The evidence presented to this court tells a different story entirely. Victoria felt her heart begin to race. The evidence shows that Mr. Sterling began meeting with divorce attorneys 18 months before filing for divorce.
The evidence shows that he conducted an extramarital affair for the majority of his marriage while claiming emotional neglect. Bradley's face was ashen. Most damning of all, the evidence shows that Mr. Sterling viewed his marriage not as a partnership, but as a long-term financial strategy designed to gain access to his wife's assets. Judge Harrison's voice grew stern. This court will not reward fraud with financial gain. The prenuptial agreement signed by both parties is valid and enforceable. Mr. Sterling's petition to invalidate it is denied in its entirety. Victoria felt Margaret squeeze her arm, but she remained focused on the judge. Furthermore, this court finds that Mr. Sterling has engaged in a pattern of deceptive conduct designed to defraud Mrs. Sterling of her assets. I am ordering a full investigation into Mr. Sterling's financial conduct during the marriage, including his attempts to hide assets and manipulate the proceedings. Bradley's lawyer was whispering frantically in his ear, but Bradley seemed frozen. Mrs. Sterling, I understand you have filed a countersuit alleging fraud and seeking damages. Margaret stood. Yes, Your Honor. I am ruling in favor of Mrs. Sterling on all counts. Mr. Sterling is ordered to repay all funds improperly taken from marital accounts, plus interest and penalties. He is also ordered to pay Mrs. Sterling's legal fees in defending against his fraudulent claims. Judge Harrison set down her papers and looked directly at Bradley. Mr. Sterling, this court has rarely seen such a calculating and systematic attempt to defraud a spouse. Your conduct has been not only legally reprehensible, but morally despicable. You have wasted this court's time with frivolous claims while attempting to destroy a woman whose only crime was trusting you.
The judge's voice rose slightly. You stood in this courtroom and claimed to be a victim while the evidence clearly showed you to be a perpetrator. You have committed perjury, fraud, and theft. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution. Bradley slumped in his chair as if he had been physically struck. This court is adjourned. As Judge Harrison left the bench, the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushed for the exits, lawyers gathered their papers, and spectators began discussing what they had just witnessed. Victoria sat quietly for a moment, processing what had just happened. It was over. Finally. Completely over. Margaret leaned over and whispered, "How do you feel?" Victoria considered the question. "Empty," she said finally, "and free." Chapter 17. The Aftermath. The verdict made national news. Legal experts called it one of the most decisive rejections of a prenup challenge in recent memory. Business publications wrote about the case as a cautionary tale about protecting assets in marriage. Women's rights groups hailed it as a victory against financial manipulation. Victoria read none of it. Instead, she spent the week after the trial at her cabin in Vermont, walking in the woods and thinking about her future. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Margaret called on Thursday with updates. The DA is definitely pressing charges, she reported. Fraud, perjury, theft. Bradley's looking at serious jail time. And Sarah Chen? She's cooperating fully. Probably won't face charges given her testimony. Victoria found she didn't care much about Bradley's fate anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something cleaner and stronger. What about the money? Margaret asked. Keep whatever the court awarded for legal fees. Donate the rest to organizations that help women escape financial abuse. Victoria, that's over $2 million. I don't want his money, Margaret. I never did. This was never about money. Then what was it about? Victoria looked out at the mountains, their peaks dusted with early snow. Truth, she said simply. It was about truth. When Victoria returned to New York the following week, she found her life fundamentally changed. The media attention had been intense, but largely positive. Women reached out to thank her for fighting back. Business leaders praised her for standing up to manipulation. Young entrepreneurs asked her for advice about protecting themselves and their assets. But the most meaningful contact came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Sterling? The young woman on the phone sounded nervous.
My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a lawyer in Chicago, and I read about your case in the news. How can I help you, Ms. Walsh? I think my husband is doing something similar to what yours did. The financial manipulation, the hidden meetings with lawyers, the way he's been creating problems in our marriage. I didn't recognize it until I read about your case. Victoria felt her heart clench. What kind of help do you need? I don't know. I don't have your resources. I can't afford a team of investigators and lawyers, but I can't let him destroy me either. Victoria made a decision that would change the direction of her life. Ms. Walsh, what if you didn't have to worry about resources? Chapter 18. The Foundation. 6 months later, Victoria stood in a conference room overlooking Central Park, addressing a room full of lawyers, investigators, and counselors. The Sterling Foundation for Financial Justice had grown faster than she had ever imagined possible. We've helped over 200 women in the past 6 months, women who were being financially manipulated, coerced, or defrauded by spouses who saw their success as something to exploit rather than celebrate. The foundation provided legal representation, investigation services, and financial protection for women facing sophisticated financial manipulation in their marriages. Victoria had funded it with $50 million of her own money and recruited some of the best legal minds in the country to staff it. The Bradley Sterling case was not unique. Our research shows that financial abuse in high-asset marriages is far more common than anyone realized. Successful women are being targeted by men who see marriage as a business opportunity rather than a personal commitment.
Margaret, who now served as the foundation's legal director, stood to present their latest statistics. We're seeing patterns, she explained. Long courtships designed to study the target's assets and vulnerabilities. Prenups signed with the intention of later challenging them. Systematic documentation of the wife's behavior to build cases for emotional abuse or neglect. Victoria thought about Jennifer Walsh, who had successfully defended against her husband's attempt to claim half of her medical practice. About Dr. Sarah Kim, whose ex-husband had tried to claim credit for her pharmaceutical patents. About tech entrepreneur Maria Santos, whose husband had been secretly recording their conversations for 2 years. The good news, Margaret continued, is that when these cases are properly defended, the perpetrators almost never succeed. The key is early detection and aggressive response. After the meeting, Victoria stood alone in her office, looking out at the city she loved. Her personal life was simpler now. No husband to worry about, no marriage to maintain, no one to trust but herself. It should have felt lonely, but it didn't. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Reeves. Bradley was sentenced today. 3 years in federal prison. Victoria deleted the message without responding. She had more important things to think about. Chapter 19. The Pattern. 2 years after her divorce, Victoria had settled into a new rhythm. The Sterling Foundation was thriving, having helped over 1,000 women protect themselves from financial predators. Victoria's personal life was quiet but fulfilling. She dated occasionally but never seriously, focused her energy on her company and her foundation, and found peace in the simplicity of not having to trust anyone with her heart. The patterns they had identified at the foundation were disturbing in their consistency. The men who targeted successful women followed remarkably similar playbooks: charm, romance, gradual financial integration, then systematic exploitation. It's like they're all reading from the same manual, Margaret observed during one of their weekly strategy meetings. Maybe they are, Victoria replied thoughtfully. Maybe there are actual resources teaching men how to do this. The investigation that followed that conversation led to the Foundation's most important discovery yet: an underground network of consultants who specialized in helping men marry wealthy women and extract maximum value from the relationships. They call it strategic marriage planning, David Reeves reported to Victoria's team. There are workshops, online courses, even one-on-one coaching. They teach everything from how to identify targets, to how to manipulate prenups, to how to build cases for invalidating them. Victoria felt sick. How many men are involved in this?
Hundreds that we can identify, probably thousands more. And how many women have been targeted? Unknown, but based on the patterns we are seeing in our cases, it could be in the tens of thousands. Victoria made another decision that would define the next phase of her life. We're going public with this. All of it. The network, the methods, the cases. Women need to know what they're up against. Chapter 20. The Revelation. Victoria's expose of the Strategic Marriage Network made international headlines. The 60-minute segment she participated in was watched by over 20 million people. The documentary that followed won an Emmy and sparked congressional hearings on financial abuse. But the most satisfying moment came when she testified before Congress about the need for stronger legal protections against matrimonial fraud. Senators, she said, addressing the Judiciary Committee, imagine if someone developed a systematic method for robbing banks. Imagine if they held workshops teaching this method, coached people on how to implement it, and created networks to share best practices. We would call that organized crime. She paused, looking directly at the camera that was broadcasting the hearing live. That is exactly what is happening to successful women across this country. Marriage is being weaponized as a tool for financial theft, and our legal system is not equipped to handle the sophistication of these attacks. The legislation that resulted from those hearings, dubbed the Sterling Act, created new federal penalties for matrimonial fraud and established specialized courts to handle complex financial abuse cases. But Victoria's greatest satisfaction came from the individual women the foundation continued to help. Women like Dr. Amanda Foster, whose husband had been systematically poisoning her reputation with colleagues while planning to claim her medical research as his intellectual property. Or tech entrepreneur Lisa Chen, whose husband had been secretly documenting her work habits to build a case that she was an unfit mother.
Each case reinforced Victoria's belief that what had happened to her was not personal, it was systemic. Bradley hadn't targeted her because of who she was as a person, he had targeted her because of what she represented as an opportunity. Epilogue. The envelope. 5 years after her divorce, Victoria received an unexpected visitor. "There's a young woman here to see you," her assistant announced. "She says her name is Sarah Chen." Victoria looked up from her desk, surprised. "Send her in." Sarah looked older, more serious than she had during the trial. She wore a simple business suit and carried herself with the dignity of someone who had learned hard lessons. "Mrs. Sterling?" Sarah said, remaining standing near the door. "Thank you for seeing me." "What can I do for you, Sarah?" "I wanted to apologize and to thank you." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit." Sarah perched on the edge of the chair, clearly nervous. "I know what I did was wrong. The affair, the lies, helping Bradley plan his case against you. I was young and stupid, and I thought I was in love. You were manipulated too," Victoria said gently. "Bradley was very good at making people believe what he needed them to believe. That's what I wanted to thank you for. After the trial, after everything came out, I realized that I had been just another tool in his strategy. He never loved me any more than he loved you. He was using me to hurt you and to build his case." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I found this in Bradley's things after he was arrested. I think you should have it." Victoria took the envelope with curiosity. It was addressed to Bradley in handwriting she didn't recognize. "What is it?" "Open it," Sarah said quietly. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, a certificate of completion from something called the Strategic Marriage Institute. The certificate was dated 6 months before Victoria had met Bradley. Victoria stared at the document, feeling a chill run down her spine. "He planned it all," Sarah said softly. "From the very beginning. The way he approached you at that charity gala, the things he said about your company, even the restaurant he chose for your first date, it was all calculated." Victoria set the certificate down carefully. "How do you know?" "Because I found his notes. Pages and pages of research about you, your company, your habits, your interests. He studied you like a business plan before he ever introduced himself." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Bradley hadn't fallen in love with her and then been corrupted by greed. He had targeted her from the moment they met. "Sarah,
Why are you telling me this now? Because you helped me see the truth about what happened to me, and because other women deserve to know the truth about what happened to you. Victoria looked at the certificate again, then at Sarah. What do you want to do with this information? I want to help. I want to work with your foundation, if you'll have me. I want to help other women avoid what we both went through. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she had felt in years. Sarah, I think that's exactly what we need to do. As Sarah left her office that afternoon, Victoria sat alone with the envelope and its contents. The final evidence of Bradley's betrayal. The proof that their entire relationship had been a lie from the very beginning. She should have felt angry, or hurt, or devastated. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Gratitude. Gratitude that she had been strong enough to fight back. Gratitude that she had resources and privilege that allowed her to defend herself. Gratitude that her experience could help other women avoid the same trap. And gratitude that she had learned the most important lesson of all. That her worth was not determined by someone else's love, but by her own strength, her own vision, and her own capacity to protect and empower others. Victoria Sterling had won more than a legal victory. She had won her freedom, her truth, and her future. The envelope sat on her desk as the sun set over the city she had conquered twice, once as a businesswoman and once as a survivor. Tomorrow, she would use its contents to help other women write their own stories of justice and redemption. But tonight, she would simply savor the victory of a woman who had trusted, been betrayed, fought back, and won. Justice, as it turned out, was even sweeter than revenge. The end.
This story is dedicated to every woman who has ever been told she was too much, too successful, too strong, too independent, by someone who was simply not enough for her. Your worth is not diminished by their inadequacy. Your success is not a weapon to be used against you. Your strength is not a flaw to be corrected. Trust your instincts, protect your assets, fight for your truth. You are enough, exactly as you are.